Since I've been revisiting series that I thought I wasn't going to do anymore, I've decided maybe I'll do one last episode of Rate the Artist, and if this is a success, maybe I'll do more. Now, whereas I got rid of First Impressions because I just didn't think I was good at it, I got rid of Rate the Artists honestly because they were a stopgap measure for a time when I didn't really know where the channel was going, and I needed some fast content to sort of plug the gaps. I would have done something like that this summer if I hadn't been busy working at other stuff. Now, if you recall, I did pretty much all the bands that I really like, you know, that at the time I would have considered like my favorite bands. Back then, I did the Beatles, I did Yes, I did Genesis. Some of that was the ease of doing those reviews. You know, I have pretty much every Yes album, I have pretty much every Genesis album, I have every Beatles album. But I avoided doing this video for a couple of reasons. One of them was that at the time I thought I was going to do a Pink Floyd retrospective someday. I don't think that's going to happen though. The other reason is that the Pink Floyd are tremendously important to me. Because they are, quite literally, they are the band that got me into music. Because I was a very casual fan. I didn't have artists I really liked. I just had songs that I listened to that were from my parents' collections. Right up until I was 13 years old. And what happened when I was 13 years old was that I bought Animals by Pink Floyd. And that was the first album I ever bought with my own money. I could still remember waiting for that and then getting it and then putting it out on the computer, and then I had an iPod at the time. I didn't have a phone. And just listening to that album over and over and over again. And then the next one, and then I got Wish You Were Here, and Wish You Were Here was the same. It was the same way. My parents already had Dark Side of the Moon. I don't know whether they had a copy of it themselves. I don't think they did. I think they had it from somebody else. It was like somebody lent them their CD and they put it on the computer. But then it was Wish You Were Here, and then it was Metal. And then Metal was the second one that I really fell in love with. Metal is, to this day, I think probably still my favorite Pink Floyd album. It's Metal or Animals or maybe even Piper at the Gates of Dawn. But the bottom line is, over the next year, I bought all of the Pink Floyd albums. I got that had been released up to that time. I got The Wall, Saucerful of Secrets, Atom Heart Mother, Umaguma, The Final Cut, Momentary Lapse of Reason, The Division Bell. I'm remembering the order in which I bought them pretty much. And I love them all. They were my favorite band for like a solid year. You know, for this whole year of my life, they were my favorite band ever. Maybe even like 2 years. I discovered other bands during that time. Like there was a documentary I watched about metal that introduced me to both the Beatles and King Crimson. That, they played a clip of Tomorrow Never Knows and the title track to In the Court of the Crimson King. I bought both those albums within the year. So in a very real sense, Pink Floyd were my gateway into music, and I think that's true for a lot of people. I think for a lot of people who don't really get into like more artsy and out there music, I think they're the gateway drug into more artsy and out there music. That being said, they do have that kind of misaimed fandom, and they get that same thing that Tool get that. Tool's fandom is like this a lot, where, people, and Radiohead too, people hype them up like they're the most wild, the craziest, the most brain-meltingly out there music ever created by mortal man on this earth, and they really aren't. But that being said, really special, really sentimental place in my heart. hard to rate because of that. Because even though I don't listen to them very much anymore, that's just because I overplayed them. Every Pink Floyd album, barring maybe the first one, every Pink Floyd album, barring... We gotta close that window. Every Pink Floyd album, barring Piper at the Gates of Dawn, The Momentary Lapse of Reason, and arguably The Division Bell, or no, and the Endless River, I've listened to multiple times, and I got worn out on these guys really, really badly. I actually didn't buy The Endless River when it was new. I didn't buy it until a little under a year after it came out, and it was because the Endless River came out during the peak of my, oh my god, I cannot listen to Pink Floyd. I've heard every single song of theirs way too much. I'm just tired of them. That's kind of never really gone away, you know. But the Pink Floyd albums I return to the most now are the ones that I played less in those days. Like, I come back to Piper a lot. I come back to, you know, even though I played metal to death, I still go back to metal a lot. But they are a very interesting, very unique band. They really are, I think, like 3 or 4 different bands, even though the members never really changed. I feel like there's 2 or 3 different fan bases for Pink Floyd, because I feel like you have the Syd Barrett era, which I know there is a significant body of people who like Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and I don't think particularly care for anything else the band's ever done. And I don't agree with those people, but I am broadly sympathetic to them. Likewise, there are also people who like everything from Piper to metal or Dark Side of the Moon. Don't necessarily go for a lot of the band's later stuff. Me, I would say the peak years where I like Pink Floyd the most are from 67 to maybe 77. That first 10 years, because The Wall is a great album, but The Wall is where the downward spiral begins, and they kind of just keep going, you know. The Final Cut's okay. The Division Bell is... The Momentary Lapse of Reason is not a very good album. The Division Bell is really whatever, you know. It's very average. It's one of those 90s albums that is really, really long. Doesn't need to be anywhere near as long as it is. I've got my own problems with that. And then, for 20 years, nobody thought there was going to be another Pink Floyd album. I remember when I got into them, I was like, nah, they're done. There's never going to be another Pink Floyd album. And then, out of nowhere, The Endless River comes out. And like I said, this was at the peak of my band fatigue with Pink Floyd. It came out, I was like, nice, whatever. Didn't buy it. The other thing that scared me with The Endless River was all instrumental. And I've gone on record as saying before that the instrumentals from the Gilmour-led Floyd don't do very much for me at all. I like Marooned, and that's about it. The instrumentals on A Momentary Lapse are horrifyingly sort of 80s mainstream generic. They sound like kind of like Kenny G songs, if I recall correctly. Whereas the Division Bell, the instrumentals are okay. You know, Cluster 1's okay. Marooned is very, very good. I don't remember if there's another one. I want to say there is, but I gotta say, even though when it comes down to the Waters-Gilmour disagreement, I'm probably on David Gilmour's side, at least when it came to what happened in the 80s. The Gilmour era Floyd is, by and large, not very good. But I did finally buy The Endless River about 2 years ago. I've listened to it, and I really haven't listened to it since. I don't know if it got two response. I seem to recall it getting a very mixed response. I feel like it was kind of praised and kind of slammed all at the same time. And I kind of echo those emotions. Like, there's stuff that I really, really like. I like that they kind of went back musically to, like, the Atom Heart Mother and Uma Guma days, especially because the band has basically disowned those albums. You know, the band members don't like them. They didn't put any songs from them on any of the greatest hits albums, I believe. It was cool that they were going back to that era and kind of looking at it. And it was a cool tribute to Richard Wright, but I really don't know what to say about it, and I really haven't listened to it very much since. But what I was saying about Gilmore era Floyd, Gilmore era Floyd to me is kind of just like inferior attempts to be like the Waters era, the later Waters era, to try to sort of recapture that, The Wall, and like Dark Side of the Moon sound, that very slick, very kind of cold and clinical, but also that very 70s sound that they had, and it's, a momentary lapse of reason. I know more than one person who calls it the corporate 80s album, where you feel like the record company was calling the shots as much as the band members were, whispering in Gilmore's ear, being like, "You've got to make this album, man. You could be rich, man." And the fact that that Wright and I think Nick Mason in particular are mostly replaced by session musicians on that album. And the fact that it basically is a David Gilmour solo album. So weird how both of the 80s Pink Floyd albums are basically somebody's solo album that had the Pink Floyd name slapped on it to increase the marquee value. But in any case, so to the task of actually rating the artist. Now this is kind of a hard one because they have lows, and by no means all of their stuff is sort of peak and by now this is kind of a hard one to do because this band does have lows, and by no means every Pink Floyd album is way up there. There are several of them that are not that good, but I would say overall 9 out of 10, because partially for sentimental value and partially because they were very good at all the stuff that they did for the most part. They were a great psychedelic rock band. They were a really good, weird, idiosyncratic, prog, avant-garde, whatever band from 68 to 71. They were a good kind of mainstream rock, MOR prog band in the mid-70s. I mean MOR in the nicest possible meaning of the word in this case, by the way. And they were an okay kind of baby boomer sellout, shadow of what we used to be band in the 80s and 90s. There's not a Pink Floyd album that I truly dislike, in spite of the fact that I really don't care for Momentary Lapse. So yeah, 9 out of 10, very good, would recommend.